All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Perfect. Okay. My name is Dr. Chelsea Ale. I am the president of the Professional Diving Coaches Association. We wanted to have a wonderful town hall today with Mike Retcher, who's the National Events Manager for USA Diving. As most of you know, USA Diving just hosted national championships in Mission Viejo, California. And so we kind of wanted to talk to Mike a little bit to see how he felt like the event went, what they felt like they did well, what they're going to change moving forward, and just kind of get a little bit of an understanding of sort of how everything went on their side. So, without further ado, Mike, can you please tell everyone a little bit about yourself, your background, and what it is your job with USA Diving is?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Retcher, as Chelsea said, the National Events Manager for USA Diving. And before I get into myself, Chelsea, I just wanted to say thanks for inviting me to come on, especially at a time when, I know everybody's either pretty busy or coming down from a really busy couple of weeks. I think carrying on these conversations is so important, and really appreciate your partnership with USA Diving and everything you're doing. So thank you first. Um, but a little bit about myself. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, I've been with USA Diving just about 2 years now officially. Came in after having the opportunity to run a couple events independently alongside USA Diving, but I wear a couple different hats. I also am the diving coach for Bowling Green State University in Northwest Ohio, a school in the MAC conference. And it allows me to keep well in touch with the coaches on the NCAA side and the athletes and kind of stay relevant on the sport that side. And then I get to plan all domestic events for USA Diving, and USA Diving is a small staff, so we all do a little bit of everything.
Perfect. Yes, we're very happy to have you, and we're glad that we can make this work. We want to have a really good partnership with USA Diving. So, anything we can do to collaborate together is definitely something that we are interested in. So, appreciate your time. I know it was a quick turnaround for everyone. I'm sure a lot of people will be watching this after the fact, not necessarily quite today, but it works out. So, I guess let's get started. If you could just overall general thoughts, feelings, opinions about the national championships, and then we'll kind of get into more specific questions if that works well for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a really quick overview for anybody who is watching who might not know what a USA Junior National Championship looks like, which I'm sure isn't many of you. USA Diving athletes at the junior level have to qualify at one of 12 regional meets, then go to a zone meet, and then to nationals from there. So we had about 584, I believe, unique athletes on the junior side, and then approximately 132 coaches, all well represented. And I believe it was 117 clubs, if I remember all those numbers right, or all of those are pretty close anyway. Anyway, it is a 10-day competition format because when you have to get in all four age groups, A, B, C, and D, both genders, boards, it is a lot of competition to fit in a very small amount of time. And it takes a humongous move of volunteers, judges, medical staff, staffing. It's a pretty extensive operation, to be honest.
Yes, it is definitely a lot of work, and you guys do a great job of making it all kind of happen together. So, if we just kind of went into different topics, the first one would be like event operation and logistics. So, what aspects do you think of the schedule went really well, and what areas do you think you could all improve upon in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. My goal through this meeting, through a lot of the great questions that we have set up, is to provide as much transparency into what we do, how we do it, and why. And of course, hopefully, have some engaging feedback, whether as a result directly of this meeting or emails, in the future, because we're all working towards the same goal, right? Make diving better, build diving as a sport. So going back to your question, what do I believe went well for the meet? If we look at the operation and logistics side, the amount of equipment that it takes to put on a meet of this caliber, when you're running up to 5 events at a time and anyone, and I apologize, guys, I have a new kitten that is, well, very interested in what I'm doing. But when you have a meet with up to 5 events at one time, it takes that many different sets of judging pads, judges, announcers, multiple computers to run the Colorado timing system alongside the dive meets programming. It takes a very orchestrated network of well, just equipment. And as we all know, technology is not always the most friendly thing. It's unpredictable. And if we look at what went well, we had very few delays. We had one major instance where we had an equipment failure. And unfortunately, the wiring around the pool deck that was in the cement failed. You know, how do you prepare for that? How do you predict that happening with a facility with a really great infrastructure? And so, um, that situation specifically with the way that our hosting partner, Mission Viejo, is set up is we had all of our volunteers in a room watching a big security TV, and that's how they saw the divers. And so to move really quickly to flashcards in that instance would have been really difficult because they couldn't see the judges. And so we had to kind of quickly pivot to figure out, do we go to flashcards right away and then try to figure out a system where we can relay those scores for 5 different events, or do we give our Colorado technician who was on site? And that's one of the coolest parts about this meet is we, pretty much try to pull out all the stops between Mission Viejo and the resources they brought. USA Diving, Colorado Timing Systems has their lead technician on site. So the guy who can fix literally any piece of Colorado equipment is there with us. And it's always crucial to pause for just a moment, as anxious and as ready as everybody is to keep going, but to really try to allow the experts to see if they can make a fix. Sorry, I got into the weeds there, but as far as operationally and logistically, very few days we were more than 30 minutes off schedule, which going into this meet, when you are trying to predict the number of entries, you would think it would be pretty easy. But unfortunately, if you ran this timeline simply based off the number of eligible qualifiers, it would be almost a 13 or 14-day meet. What you have to do is try to predict based on trends from the last few years, how many actual athletes will enter into the competition based on who had qualified, adding in the potential pre-qualified athletes in the high performance side, who you never know until they sign up. And with our current rule set, anyone is allowed to sign up for the preliminary or, if qualified, into the semifinals events up to 3 hours before. So preparing for an unlimited set of variables within building a timeline for a meet like this is really only done by past practice and guessing, best guesswork, and then making adjustments on the fly and trying to build in buffers. And one thing that I did a little bit better, but there's some room for improvement from 2024's meet, is building in additional buffer time in the transitional periods between group practices, between event warmups and the event start times. We have, at the senior level, USA Diving has tried to elevate the production aspect of these competitions to really match some of the TV elements that are now growing in Olympic sports. And we were really trying to bring some of those elements to the junior athletes to make them really feel as though this is a national championship outside of everything that they've done. And some things worked really well, and sometimes there were scoreboard issues, and sometimes there were sound issues, but definitely opportunities there where I think some production type things went really great, and sometimes maybe not as smooth in transition as we would like. Trying to think if there's anything really intimate within the operations or logistics of the meet. Unless anyone here has a question about a good or a bad aspect operationally or logistically, I think that's a somewhat of an overview.
No, thank you for that. It is hard to try and figure out a timeline. You just don't know what's going to happen on all the things, especially being an outdoor pool. You have weather that can be an effect for you, rain delays, things like that. So one of the challenges I know that can happen at outdoor meets is sun and heat, and dealing with those type of environmental issues, or not necessarily an issue, but it just changes the dynamic, right? So I heard that, a handful of people were sitting in the sun for a long time, which it happens, when you're judging and coaching. Have you all thought about different ways to handle those type of elements moving forward, or do you put in things in place to sort of just help make sure that the judges aren't kind of involved in the sun too much?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I talked about first the transparency in what we do, how we do, and why we do it. This is going to be hopefully an opportunity for people to share ideas, because I don't believe that any one of us has the answers for all of these issues. Because what happens is, as we go to facilities all around the country for these meets, every single environment we're in is different and unique. right? And we're talking about flying in whatever equipment we have, using what resources we have on the pool deck at the facility we're at, et cetera. And so when we look at this meet specifically in the outdoor conditions, anybody who was there for the first sets of practice in the morning were in pants and hooded sweatshirts and jackets. You would think Southern California, at least I'm an Ohio guy. I grew up in Northwest Ohio. We have 4 seasons, sometimes even in one day. I would have not thought that Southern California in the heat of July, I would need a jacket. So thankfully, I just happened to overpack and pack one with me. But then, by 10 a.m., between 10 and 11, the sun, the heat broke through the kind of fog and the clouds, and then it was beating sun for, the rest of the day until the sun went down. So fortunate that that area doesn't receive a lot of adverse weather in the terms of tornadoes and massive thunderstorms. However, there was a tsunami warning for any of you that were there. That was unique. I had not crossed that bridge before, but let's go back to the question, the sun. So when you look at how to answer these questions, you have to try to put every single hat on that you can think of. The hat of the athlete, then the hat of the judge, the hat of the coaches, the hat of the spectators and the parents, because they're each one of those people at just a start are incredibly important. So when you look at pop-up tents or you look at some kind of element of shade over the judges, because arguably these judges are helping to secure qualification spots for international travel for athletes. These judges are responsible in part for helping to name our national champions and our podium winners and everywhere in between. So taking care of them and to make sure that they are at their absolute best as they evaluate the athletes is important. How do you put an umbrella over them when it's going to block a spectator who not only has paid a spectator admission, but who has also traveled a couple thousand miles potentially to be at the contest? How do you accomplish making sure you put the judges in a position where you're not going to block the view of the coaches who are there to coach their athletes, celebrate them, and make sure that they are, performing at their absolute best? And then from the athlete's perspective, who usually probably won't see a lot in the way of the shade and sun themselves, how do you make sure that they're best protected to keep their energy levels high and not in the sun too much? Do you have enough shade for them, in areas off of the water outside of the pool deck? So there's the big complex question. So you look at it from a judge's perspective, they should have umbrellas, a way to keep themselves cool, volunteers delivering things like water. And we did have, I'm not sure if this was noticed or not, we did have cooling towels that the judges would wear around their necks with buckets of ice water that in between their judging assignments or their switches, the panel switches, et cetera, they would be able to kind of freshen that up. And that was definitely a big thing that they enjoyed. And the judges understand that an umbrella over their heads is great, but then it blocks the view of the spectators and or the streams, the camera angles to get those as best as possible, making sure that there aren't obstructions in place. So consideration into how to best protect the judges from the sun. I think we did as much as we could with the resources we had, but some of the things I've thought of after the fact are, can we do more things with the actual panels where the judges aren't sitting in the sun for any one period too long? Erica Sorgi, for anybody who doesn't know her, acted as our head of referees for the contest, and she did an absolute phenomenal job at organizing coaches and following the rules by how many coaches, which coaches by zones, replacement coaches when they weren't able to judge, making sure that the judges had the right rotations of rest in between contests. I mean, it is such a complex puzzle and really need to give a good shout out to Erica because she just did a phenomenal job. Can we afford to bring more neutral judges? So there are no coaches in the seats. Can we afford to bring more neutral judges to ensure that they have more rest in between events? Those are all really great questions, but where does that money come from then? Those costs associated have to come from somewhere. So where do they come from? Where do we take away or sacrifice to bring relief to them if necessary?
No, I appreciate that. And it is so hard doing meets outside. I know I ran meets all the time in Tallahassee, Florida, and it was like you start off and really like all layered up, and then all of a sudden you're taking off your layers and you're putting your layers back on. Like being outside is definitely tough. A thought totally outside the box. I started playing pickleball recently, and they had these like little fans you put around your neck that put air at you and
Yeah.
stuff. If you
Mhm.
got maybe a place like that to sponsor, or they also have things like that that go around your neck that are like ice. So then you aren't paying
Mhm.
for it, have like a sponsor to do that. I mean, it doesn't help with the sun, but it might help with the heat, or getting like hats for all the judges that are sponsored by someone could also be another. Not like it's a huge fix, but it could be something that, might help a little bit or something in the future.
No, those are great ideas. And I have some time slated in later to talk about some of the sponsorship type opportunities. So I'm going to circle back to that in a little bit, but I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, those are great ideas. And you're going to see me look over at another screen I have sitting beside me and type because I'm a big note taker. I write things down because I'll have, I'll remember in the moment, but you see me looking over, it's mainly because I'm typing a few notes. So I'm going to write that in.
Perfect. No, I do the same thing. I try to make notes all the time because I don't want to forget
Mhm.
anything. Okay, so when it comes to, you talked about, parents and views and trying to like make sure that the athletes are getting all the logistics of like what they need as well too. How much, I mean, I'm assuming a lot of thought goes into that, but with a pool like Mission Viejo, is it easy or hard to sort of navigate how to handle the parents and athletes and judges and coaches, or do you find any struggles with that?
Yeah, I think um, every area of that, again, has positives and, well, obstacles or potential barriers. Let's look at our coaches for one. We are both coaches, have coached for a long time, right? And simple things like wearing a credential around our necks or at our belt is easily forgotten or not the first thing we're thinking about because we're there to coach athletes. But when we look at the bigger picture and we take a step back, we are governed with safe sport, and it is a safe sport requirement that every adult on the pool deck is easily identifiable, and any, um, well, especially adult member that has any potential direct access to minors are credentialed. And so, one of the challenges we have is policing ourselves. Coaches often are struggling to remember to keep themselves kind of in check. And it's understandable. Athletes the same, right? They're in their suits, they're traveling back and forth from the locker room to their bags and facility specific. When you don't have a locker room right off the pool deck, it just adds another whole set of extra volunteers and personnel and checkpoints that we have to do to make sure that we have a safe pool deck. Because above all else, above all competition results, making sure that each one of our athletes is safe and our coaches are in a safe environment is, paramount. So with the coaches, and I don't mean to call out any coaches negatively. I'm recognizing the challenge that we all face when we're there for one thing, but to keep a pool deck controlled, that's a big one. From a parent and spectator access, it is understandable to have to sit in the bleachers and I don't know if any coaches were there. I myself would try to go sit in the stands for at least a little bit and get to watch, get to see the vantage point, the views from others, just get to see operationally, logistically around. And I myself got hot. I'm pretty fair skinned. This is me. If you can tell, still have some red just to my face, and my eyebrows are pretty white and gone. So I even got quite a bit of sun, and I can imagine what our parents went through sitting there, especially those that were there for multiple sessions. But here's the trade-off again. Even a facility like Mission or any facility that's outdoors, any attempt at shade that you're going to put up, at least at that facility, potentially causes obstructive views to the 10-meter tower. And then, of course, the costs associated with that, et cetera. But um, I know that there were some spectators that really would have loved to see some more shade, and that's something we can work on in the future. But we also have to do everything we talked about making sure we balance the needs and the wants of everybody. Um, from an athlete standpoint, the dryland area was definitely, well, it had a lot of potential barriers and opportunities where we needed to make sure that the next group of competing athletes had the dryland space to warm up and really be ready, while at the same time not taking away from the competition experience of those that were actively competing. There's another conundrum that's really tough. How do you allow a youth athlete or an athlete in general to make sure they're warmed up and getting ready when their coach is focusing on an athlete of theirs that is competing? Many clubs, especially traveling that far, might not have the ability or the financial resources to travel with multiple coaches. So it's not like they can put one coach with the competition athletes and one coach back watching the dryland area, making sure that the athletes are staying observed and monitored the entire time on the pool deck that aren't actively competing. And if we take a step back, we're talking about 10, 11 and unders. We're talking 12, 13-year-old kids. And how do you effectively keep them happy, in good mindsets, but controlled at the same time without taking the competition experience away? And that is not unique to Mission. I actually love the fact that the dryland area is so close to the competition area. because other facilities that might have the dryland area off-site or 2 to 5 minute walk away, it makes it even more of a challenge for these coaches who are struggling to be themselves and 4 or 5 athletes. How do you go through that? So again, I know I talk in these big general statements, but when you look at the lens and the pathway of each one of these major groups of coaches, of athletes, of judges, of spectators, there's always going to be kind of a positive and a negative draw. And part of what has to make us successful is the compromises we make in the middle to try to make the best experience and the most equal experience possible for everybody.
No, it definitely seems like you put a lot of thought into it, which I think is important because there's not one way that's going to make everyone happy, regardless what facility you're at.
Mhm.
You're never going to be able to do every single thing and make it perfect because there's so much logistics. So it's nice to hear you
Mhm.
actually like really thinking through the decisions that you all are making so that, even if it wasn't maybe perfect, that's okay because you guys thought about the way to make it the most perfect in the
Mhm.
situation. So with warm-up times and, I'm sorry, were you going to say
Mhm.
something?
No, I'm actually glad you're going into warm up times because that was the next thing I wanted to talk about too. So it's perfect.
Perfect. So, how do you all determine when it comes to warm-up times for like prelims, semifinals, finals? I know with like the amount of divers you have and everything to make sure they get adequate warm-up, but they're not getting too much warm-up where they don't really want to do anything and then they're just sitting around. Like, what is the thought process with warm-up times?
Yeah, great question. Trying to standardize it across the sport is really difficult because every single aspect of our sport inside the US, from NFHS and high school to AAU meets to individual state leagues or championships to USA Diving Regionals, all the way through nationals to senior level events, every single level of our sport is completely different. There's no standardized system anywhere, right? So, how do you give athletes the most or the best opportunity to be successful within that frame of event warm-up and or group practice assignments? Talking about event warm-ups first, looking at the number of athletes potentially able to be in that session, breaking that down by the number of seconds typically taken for a warm-up dive, which is very different from a 30 to 38 second average of divers at a meet like this. And then, of course, taking into consideration what level. Is it a prelim, a semi, or a final where they have to be on a assigned board where lines might be longer or lines might be shorter. A diver doesn't have that freedom or flexibility to switch back and forth between boards often, especially at this meet in the early stages. So an exact science, it doesn't exist maybe for it, but allowing there to be enough time and flexibility to cover as much of a wide range of athletes that we can. One of the notes that I did make in observations myself is we did have, especially in the last 3 or so days as we got into the finals of our oldest age groups, we had a lot of just empty time where warm-ups had event warm-ups specifically going into a final were like a wasted 15 or 20 minutes. But what's the value of that? Are there athletes out there who would warm up, every second up until that last call off the board is made? I've had a few of those in my tenure for sure. And then what's too much time, like you had talked about too, because there has to be some balance. So offering the opportunity for coaches to have the flexibility to keep the rhythms of their athletes that they're most used to. That's our goal. Can we scale back on that in the future? I think so. I think as long as we communicate out and people have a ton of advance notice to get used to whatever that rhythm's going to be, maybe for a final that has 3 dives for X age group, we're going to calculate it out to make sure that every athlete has 5 jumps or 6 jumps. And maybe we can bring that in a little bit and allow for a little bit faster timeline, but that communication and that opportunity for coaches and athletes to plan, I think, is really important too.
No, it definitely makes sense. Kind of like everything else, it's a hard balance because you want to give them enough time. You don't want to give them too much, but you want to make sure that everyone's doing well and not doing too much. You
Mhm.
did make a comment about the board's assignments, and I was curious. This is
Mhm.
sort of like, I guess, a later question in a way, but with the way that the meets are shifting next summer, so it's going to be 4 competitions instead of 3, will the
Mhm.
divers still have assigned boards for the national championships?
That's a great question. I'm going to answer that in part, and then I want to go back to the group practice assignments because I wanted to make a note about that too. So looking at the new format, the CCE and members of the CCE have definitely given some really good suggestions into the way in which the new national championships will flow. All of us agree that the goal is really to try to do our best to mirror the competition all the way through the series. So that way, athletes, parents, coaches have a similar idea to the flow from your day one at regionals to hopefully your last day at the junior national championships. And it's not going to be perfect, but how we do that is hopefully um, not sure that we can get away from split boards. I know I got outside of the question there. We're kind of narrowing in that yet. There's going to be an opportunity for feedback for both coaches coming up here within the next few days to ask one of that being one of the questions specifically, but also to athletes. So many of our meets around the country, regardless of what organization you're competing for, are moving to split boards. And I really think athletes have kind of grown accustomed to it. Facilities, parents, everyone's growing used to it. It's not the best conditions for our sport for sure, but it definitely helps us be more efficient when you put your hat on and talk about financial resources. All of us in some capacity, probably on this call and or listening later, have either owned a club or been responsible for the budgeting in some capacity. And so how do you think to start balancing that act out of, well, sure, we don't have to do split boards, but the competition might be 12 days. So which is that, which is better, which is worse? Where does that fall in line? And one of the biggest calls that I hear over and over and over again from coaches is how do we make these meets shorter? How do we make us not on the pool deck for 10 or 11 or 12 days at a time? And let's be realistic. I wear my USA Diving hat and shirt very proudly. I had great opportunity to work alongside the AAU for a few years before my time at USA Diving, and I had a great opportunity to work with the PDCA alongside that too. And so understanding that our coaches are traveling to multiple competitions across multiple organizations within the NCAA and having long meets there, then going into a USA regional zone season plus an AAU season. It's a lot and it's very demanding. And we can't just think of, oh, well, we're only going to think of USA Diving and the coaches and the athletes that represent us there. Well, no, because we want to make sure that everybody's taken care of equally. So going back now, will it be split boards? Good question. I imagine yes, that in some capacity we will probably see split boards, but that's not for sure and that's not definite. And we're going to do our best to try to figure out how not to, as long as we can take care of the schedule and make sure that we're not being overly demanding for our coaches, athletes, and judges.
Perfect. No, it definitely makes. I mean, when AAU first switched to split boards, I know it was really weird for people at first, but then the meet started going a lot faster, and so people definitely got
Mhm.
a lot used to it. I know there's comments now about when the events are so small, does it make sense to do split boards though, or just let the athletes pick the board they're most comfortable with? And so that's why I was kind of sure, like under trying to figure out what the idea was to move forward with that.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at some of these semifinal events, so getting now to the junior nationals, and I'll be able to go through the format a little bit more in a little bit, but if we think of it like this, the easiest way when I first learned this new system was the East, Central, and West meets are now basically prelims of junior nationals. And then the junior national meet is essentially semifinals and finals. Well, even semifinal events still have 30 or more athletes. And so at what point do you split a board? Right now, the rule set currently says 40. That's when it is mandatory or required for us to split a board. But is 34 athletes appropriate to split a board or not? And that's a question I think we would probably get a lot of mixed responses on. You know, do you go to a 17 board meet or 17 people where you're waiting in line, 7, 8 minutes before your dive, or are you going to go to a 34 where you're waiting 16, 18 minutes potentially? And that's definitely a decision from our community. Well, what is better? What's the lesser of the two evils?
Right. It's like what when you get to right at that very edge, it's like where do you want it to be?
Mhm.
I know
And
you mentioned. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, please, good.
I was gonna say, I know you mentioned wanting to go back and talking about the group warm-ups and everything. So I wanted to make sure we went back and talked about that.
Yeah, group warm-ups, that is probably the most complex um, a- assignment that you could do because you can look at how many athletes are represented in each zone. You can look at how many athletes from each zone or in each age group. You can look and all of those things. But at the end of the day, we're talking about individual decisions on coaches and athletes. And the best you can do is plan if every person within those parameters were to be at every group practice assignment, every group warm up, et cetera. Well, that's really how you have to approach it. I know that there was obvious times in the mornings, for instance, when a particular group would be the first workout session of the morning. Well, it's an individual decision by the athlete, the family, and or the coach. Does that athlete go at 6:30 a.m. to practice, or do they take that morning off and they go to a later group practice? Those individual decisions we of course can't control because it's up to the athlete and the coach, but it creates this perception of this big inequality between the groups. And so that begs the question, are assigned group practice sessions the most efficient way? Probably, unless we can come up with a better system, and or are those going to be necessary in this new junior format? So I'm really trying to evaluate that the best I can, and looking at the total number of allowable unique athletes that could qualify from every zone. If you look at um, from zones to an East, Central, and West, if there was a unique qualifier on all boards, which is highly unlikely because athletes probably will qualify in some capacity on more than one board, what does that top number look like? What's probably our average, and then what's our lowest number? And when you look at that, what is that breakdown gonna be as far as the physical number of bodies per age group um, and per gender? Does that necessitate continuing group assigned warm-ups where it can be very unequal throughout? So I just presented a problem without any solution other than we're going to look at the data and we're going to take suggestions and feedback, and it goes right back to trying to find that balance, that middle line.
Well, I think the first step of making improvements is, it's kind of acknowledging like I don't have the answer right now, but I'm open to feedback and I'm open to suggestions, thoughts, feelings, opinions. Not that one answer is going to be the right one, but at least looking at it from different points of view. And you did say you were going to send out a survey, asking people how the meet went, what they felt like, could go better, things like that. I always believe constructive criticism's good. I don't think bashing anything is ever helpful. Have you heard anything back since nationals about like good, bad, and different from coaches, athletes?
Yeah, my phone number is pretty much broadcasted to the world, and if you search my name in Google, it's there, which is great because my phone is pretty busy, and I love that so many people feel comfortable. And my goal is to keep an open line of communication where any coach or parent, for that matter, can call me, text me at any time to ask questions, because challenging questions are what move us forward, right? And I believe in that. That's not a sales pitch. I want someone to come forward with an opportunity to fix. If somebody's coming at us just with a complaint, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you ruined my life, best I can do is apologize, make them feel heard, and then move on. But if somebody's coming to say, hey man, this isn't working, what if we tried this? Well, there's a great conversation. Those are the ones I get so excited about. So feedback specifically from the meet, yeah, I was so fortunate, so honestly grateful that there are probably 7 coaches that emailed me specifically, not just to say, good job or this went well or that went well, but they said, hey, here's this thing, here's my idea for it. And I got so excited. It was like Christmas because I'm looking at it and I'm like, hey, like this might work. Let's look at that. Or those are things that I really put a lot of my time and attention into. So some of the points of feedback that I got were the elevation of some of the production things we talked about, making the athletes feel as though this truly was a national championship. That was one. Um, the communication had a few holes in it for sure, and excited to talk about those on this call. But overall, had a lot of compliments about the communication and the professionalism of the staff at the meet. Had a couple of coaches comment on the presence and the number of staff that USA Diving had at the meet, and that's an initiative that I really, really pushed hard, is to make sure as many as our staff as possible can be present to help out in any capacity, whether they work directly with events or not. Um, I think those are the big ones that I remember. Um, and then, of course, we had a few. emails showing criticism, and that's good too. There's just as much of a value there. And Chelsea, I think you are like-minded like me, where I would much rather hear about the things that aren't going well than that are going well, because, well, how else are we going to get better, right? There are countless number of variables, as all of you know and can imagine, and so there are going to be things where we believe we have a plan for and don't. And then even if we have the ability to pivot and to change and react appropriately in the moment, having the opportunity to hear from people who get to see things from another perspective when done professionally and when done with a solution-oriented mindset, to me, there's really nothing better. Do you have any specific examples that you heard from in that constructive mindset that or solution-oriented mindset that we can take away?
I mean, I think good, and I don't know if it's good or bad, but for me, I haven't heard a whole lot other than the questions that we have to sort of ask you today, which is probably a good thing because people tend to have no problem telling me the bad things.
Mhm.
And so I think, again, for me, I always like to come at it as a place of like learning and growth because nothing's ever perfect, but every organization should always be trying to do better and be better. But I never want people to say, you're terrible at this, you're awful at this. How, instead it's like, okay, you didn't like this. How can we improve? How can we make it better? And so the fact that I haven't heard a lot of things, I think is good. And the fact that you're open to that dialogue and having these conversations, I think just shows how great it's going to keep getting because every event should get better and better and better. And if you're open to that constructive criticism and help, then it's just going to keep improving every single time.
Great, thank you.
Of course. So you were saying before you kind of going to talk about the new format, the new structure. Do you want to sort of explain what that might look like? I mean, we already had Sean come on here and sort of explain why that was decided, but from an events point of view, what does that look like for you? How do you see it changing? How do you see the structure sort of helping the way the meet is set up?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about this in a couple different areas. One being from a host perspective, because our site hosts are arguably some of our most important of this process, and changing the format to how many people are required to attend, say, a regional meet. While in some capacities and some of those lanes, it's great that this group of athletes no longer has to compete maybe at that first step in the group C's and D's. But on the other side of things, that presents a potential challenge. And it might be great for families and financial obligations and allowing more accessibility to the sport. But then in that same breath, how does a hosting site with the appropriate facilities that can host a meet of regional caliber, how do they pay pool expenses when there are now going to be a reduced number of athletes at them? And pool expenses, as we know, can vary wildly across the country and regionally. And so balancing not only following procedure when selecting these sites, but also in helping to make sure our hosts are taken care of. And we have as an organization responsibility fiscally to these hosts to make sure that um, they are not going backwards by helping us by hosting USA Diving Meet. So one of the challenges that we are working through right now, that I will absolutely go into more depth with later if you would like, is knowing we already did an event fee restructure for this year to help us get through the immediate short-term goals that we needed to accomplish. We as an organization, as a national office, are working very hard to digest this new format and how do we financially set not only our site hosts to be successful in hosting these competitions at every level, but also how do we make sure that our families are not overly burdened by the financial responsibility of sending an athlete through the process? So know that it's one of those, we don't have an answer to broadcast yet, but our staff as a whole is aware and actively really doing some crunching of numbers and theorizing how to be able to fill both of those cups equally. Looking through and kind of keeping in that hosting mindset through this series. Once you get to the zone meets, it kind of falls in more to normal. There really shouldn't be a lot of issue with zones and East, West, and Central fiscally being able to manage the competition. But we start asking the questions of for the East, Central, and West, is it completely neutral judges? Meaning, do we have one or multiple panels of 7 judges? Do we have enough judges? Where are they located regionally, depending on where the meets are? And I say regionally, geographically, regionally, are they close enough to have to fly, to drive? How do we make sure we don't have conflicts of interest? Because most of our judges, we are so lucky to have them, but maybe they have affiliations or ties of recent nature to current clubs or athletes in those clubs, and making sure that we avoid conflict of interest in their assignments. So how many judges do we provide? For the East Central and West meets, are we providing a full medical contingent there, which of course come with the associated costs of lodging, travel, the costs with that. And then to nationals. Um, I know that there is absolutely room for a little bit of frustration when we keep bouncing back and yo-yoing from the West Coast to the East Coast in a pretty dramatic feature. But I would love to explain anytime somebody wants um, to help people understand how much it takes in financial resources to host a USA Diving national competition. Um, think basically $10,000 a day in pool rent. Think also in revenue loss from any hosting club where they're not running programming out of that facility. Think in resources for medical, judges, staff, travel, lodging, food, all of those types of things. The longer the meets are, the farther away they are. Um, the infrastructure that is necessary as far as the travel, the rental cars, the proximity of airports, parking at the facility. I mean, there's an extensively long list. And so what we have to do when looking at national level contracts is how is the relationship between the facility and what's known as the CVB, the Community Visitors Bureau, or the Sport Tourism Bureau in that area. If you've never heard of either of those organizations, every major city has one, and their job is to bring tourism through the area. We the USA Diving National Championships, and what I'm going to now call the old format since it's behind us, bring approximately 600 unique athletes to town plus their families. For us, that's a really big number. Um, a USA swimming meet brings 1,000 a day unique athletes. And so if you are a CVB or a tourism bureau and you're looking at, well, what's the impact going to be for our local restaurants, for our local hotels, for our local businesses? Well, who are you going to go with if you had to pick between one or two at the same time, right? You're going to bring the most amount of people through. So understanding that in the discussions and the contract negotiations for these sites, it's not just about who has the physical number of diving boards that can handle the meet, who has the pool layout that can handle it. Um, there are so many intricate parts to the financial obligations required to host a national championship that I'm not going to say it's last or secondary or more so, but the facility, if it has the base requirements or enough of the requirements that are going to make for a successful competition at any level, all of those other things and the fiscal responsibility are almost unfortunately have to take precedent and look first. So for this new format and a really quick summary, um, right now what we're doing is going through the current contracts that we have at every level, every step of the way, and making sure that those communities, those facilities are still willing and able to fulfill the obligation contractually and have the opportunity to pivot if necessary um, to be successful financially. Switching now to more of the dates, the proposal, or I'm sorry, the now format with regions remaining in the mid to April to early May, zones being late May to early June, the East West Central meets concluding before July 3rd, and then our junior nationals being that late July, early August mindset. If we break those down even more, well, let's look at our sport. Regionals falling in mid-April to early May. Well, what happens outside of the sport of diving and within the sport of diving and regionals? Timing. We have the NCAA championships with potentially pull a lot of our coaches and resources in middle to end of March. We also have our partner organization and sister organization in the AAU who runs a full set of qualifying meets in late March and early April. It's not in anybody's best interest to cannibalize. That's either or, right? We can't place USA regional meets over top of AAU qualifying meets. Who wins there, right? They offer opportunity for our sport, so that's not even a question we can ask. Then you look at zones. Um, well, late to mid-May. You have a major holiday that falls in late May and Memorial Day. That is graduation for high schools pretty much in every state across the country in some capacity. There it is a enormous graduation weekend. And you also again have the AAU Red, White, and Blue National Championships. Not anybody's best interest to cannibalize, that side. So now you're looking, when you look at the physical calendar for 2026, first week of April, I believe the weekend of the 5th is what is known as, or at least the practicing part of Easter. So now you look at the following weekend and the 2 weekends after that, and our regional weekends are starting with that mid-April to really, really early May. Part of the other unique challenge going into the 2026 year with this new format is based on 2024 regional meets by rule, we had a number of regions that signed their 2026 site as directed by the national office at the time. So we have some regional sites for 26 already under contract from the 2024 regional site selection process. So now having facilities that are already under contract at a date that was predetermined 2 years ago, some facilities are okay with having the flexibility to move, others are not. And there have definitely been a lot of conversations with some facilities that said, listen, you locked this date in with us, this is our date. And that's okay, thankfully, because it falls within our proposed dates right now. Looking to zones, knowing that the original intention of the CCE was to allow parts or a whole of Memorial Day weekend to be used for a zone meet, just in case is great. Obviously, it wasn't their intention to cannibalize any other organization either. But then we have to think about the travel costs, because when you put this hat on from a spectator, from a coach, from a club owner, a business perspective, travel costs are going to be more expensive Memorial Day weekend. Hotel costs are going to be more expensive. And so looking at it again from this lens specifically, Memorial Day weekend is a really challenging time to host zones. If we kind of keep this idea that a 3-week minimum should exist from regionals to zones, zones to East West Central to nationals, it is really hard to have 3 weeks separation with also considering trying to have each of our regional meets be on opposing weekends. And I know that's always been the goal. I'd love to get that written into rule, but then we talk about facility availability and what happens when water polo and artistic swimming and swim meets go on in these facilities that are pretty popular host sites. And so the CCE gets prompted to make an exception, and they believe that exception is the best interest of that region for that time. They make the decision to grant the exception, but now we have two regions within the same zone falling on the same weekend, not allowing for anybody. Let's say there was a prom on that weekend, which are typical in late May or late April, early May. And so one of the many complexities is trying to navigate that conversation, and maybe with some really far ahead planning, we can avoid those potential conflicts. Having the East-West Central meets done before July 3rd. When you look at the physical calendar of when regionals zones are going to fall for the 2026 calendar year, there's really about a 10-day period, which also includes weekdays. So do we put an East-West Central meet on a Tuesday through Thursday or Friday to get it done before July 3rd, before July 4th holiday and travel and costs really go up for travel? But that forces parents to miss work. That forces coaches who have full-time positions outside of their coaching obligations to potentially miss a significant amount of time of work. So then if we look to only keeping it on a, let's say, Thursday to Sunday type of contest for East-West Central, is that the best option? Because then we're looking at another weekend of travel and potential facility requirements or barriers. And then we look to the junior nationals and looking at this new format of how to best organize the age groups. Do we continue to try to split it up where we have the youngest kids or the oldest kids in and out quickly? Do we give opportunity for group Ds and group As to dive on the same day, because we want those group D athletes to be inspired? I had actually one parent say that they really wish we would reconsider having our older age groups dive closer to younger age groups, because the group Cs and Ds barely get to see any A and B diving, and that's valid, right? How do you get inspired as an athlete to want to be a group A athlete at the junior nationals if you don't even get to see them dive unless you're watching them on TV? So that was an interesting point of feedback. And so looking at the the schedule for the newly formatted junior nationals. One of the other considerations that we are really looking at, World Aquatics just officially released their 2026 calendar a few days ago. Not sure if anybody saw that or not. We, and not to put any blame on anybody, are always waiting on that World Aquatics and that Pan American calendar to come out, because then things like our national championships, our training cycles for the elite athletes, and all of us are all affected by that. Even the NCAA is marginally affected by the World Aquatics schedule. And so for 2026 calendar year, they released it, maybe about a week ago now total. And now we have to react to that. So I say all of that because there's a growing calling for us to have some kind of senior competition in the summer for all of these college coaches and senior level athletes, meaning 18 years and older, to have a competition to go to. The AAU's done a great job at offering open events for college athletes, and we've seen increasing numbers of athletes attending those meets. But on the other end of that, when we go back to the financial lens, uh, it brings opportunity for these CVBs and these communities who are suffering and the economic impact of expecting or being under contract for 600 unique athletes for a 10-day period. Well, because we don't have that with this new format, maybe a few days of a senior open style of meet or some kind of similar format will give more unique athletes and bigger economic impact. And then how does that affect our coaches who just thought in their minds, hey, great, next year's junior nationals are only going to be 7 days. Well, guess what? Now it might be 10 again. So these are all things that we're trying to evaluate and see how do we best take care of the groups of people that, well, is our responsibility without overstressing our coaches and their time and their commitment, their mental health, of course, and also the financial health of our clubs and our athletes. And I'm sorry, that probably was a 30-minute answer, but there's at least a little look into the scheduling, the complexities of the scheduling, some of the barriers that exist that we're actively working through. And I think the one thing that I get the most questions on is how many people qualify from each stage on to the next, which hopefully Sean, I think he did talk about that quite extensively in your guys' town hall. I remember listening in. Um, and of course, coaches who feel one way strongly or the other about what a high performance member means and where should they qualify and where should they land. And that's definitely a question more geared towards our high performance staff, and feedback is always welcome. Um, but silent feedback or feedback not directed to the right person, as we've talked about, is ineffective, right? If we have coaches who feel very strongly, then I invite you to reach out to members of the CCE, to reach out to staff on the high performance side, because ultimately, if we really pull back all the layers, well, we're all doing this for the same reason, right? The love of the sport and to try to get medals around our necks come LA 28. I know that was big and theoretical, but did I cover at least the areas of the new format that you wanted?
You covered a lot of that. So I'd like to kind of talk about a couple little things that you mentioned in there. So one of the first things is you mentioned the cities helping with it. I know when I was in Tallahassee, I got Visit Tallahassee to give me grants for when we hosted regionals or qualifier and then USA Diving regionals. So they were amazing and gave us grants for that. Now I had to apply for them and had to work with them. Do you think USA Diving can and will help those programs work with those organizations to try and get those grants? I know for me, it was just like I just happened to know that that existed, and so I applied for it. But I don't think a lot of people know that that's actually something that you can do is apply for those type of grants. And I do think having USA Diving sort of pushing the door a little bit with that might help them get more grants, get them more resources. Is that something that USA Diving is going to work towards to helping those teams, I guess?
Absolutely. I actually just returned from Michigan. I was invited to speak at the Michigan Sports Tourism Annual Conference early this week in Holland, Michigan, specifically for that reason, to help make more introductions to our USA Diving membership in the sports tourism staff and committees that exist within those areas to start facilitating more of those conversations. I mean, that was one of the biggest reasons I was there, alongside looking at potential facilities and future events. But what we are doing now, and then I say we, meaning our staff, is working once we know the sites are selected, working with the site hosts so they understand every one of those resources you talked about, right? You said you knew that that existed from probably some past experience or some research you had done at some point in your career. Um, I had hosted a couple AAU regional qualifier meets as well. Um, and I was very fortunate that somebody who worked in the facility of the meet that of the worked in the facility that I hosted it at, they actually came from the CVB in Bowling Green. And they're like, hey, did you know this existed? A week out, I called them. They're like, yeah, we'll take care of hospitality for you, right? They just paid, a $4,000 or $5,000 bill over a really long weekend. And all it took was a random conversation that I was so fortunate. And from there, it was like, wow, this whole world exists. But a couple of things I learned while at this conference in Michigan is a little bit more in depth about the budgets that these community visitors bureaus and sport tourism bureaus, it just depends on what state you're in, is what they're called, tourism bureaus, sport convention bureaus, CVBs, whichever. Um, they, of course, have limited budgets, unlimited funding, and they pretty much get or have to decide how they're going to use those funds early in the year. And if our coaches, I'm sorry, if our site hosts aren't set with a far enough runway ahead by the time they go to these CVBs, whether it's to apply for grants, whether it's to ask for help, well, if we're not giving them the opportunity to do it early enough, then there might not be money there just because we asked too late. And so part of this, not only trying to get this schedule set as quickly as possible, is of course so our membership can train and plan appropriately at every level, but also to help those site hosts and help us make those connections with the appropriate community resources to help, fiscally.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that like a lot of them, they do their fiscal year. It's like 1 year out. They're trying to find the budget. So if you're not planned an appropriate amount of time, they may or may not have the money for you. I will
Mhm.
say to everyone who's watching now or will watching later, if you are hosting any type of diving competitions or meets, reach out to your local organization, whatever it's called. I know Tuscaloosa's Visit Tuscaloosa, Tallahassee's Visit Tallahassee, but they have money available. You just have to apply for it. So if you know you're having a meet a year from now, apply for it now, and then you can help. I mean, obviously that doesn't necessarily help for regional zones, nationals, but they get paid from tax from like beds, heads in beds, and so it's a great resource for a lot of people.
Yeah, what's so little understood is that there's no chains to it at all. It's not like you're selling your soul to somebody. It's quite literally, they're just going to give you resources without really doing a lot of work. One person I see on the call, I'll give a little shout out, is Dan Miller. Dan is from the Ohio area, if you don't know him, and they've hosted a number of regional and zone meets for USA Diving as well as AAU meets. And their organization is phenomenal at working with the local CVBs for multiple of the facilities that they worked with to do things, not only do things with them as far as helping to cover expenses, but also in chasing other revenue generating opportunities like hotel blocks. Um, a host site being organized enough to take a couple hours out of maybe their week to call hotels and negotiate room blocks to then get that information out to the membership puts rebates in the pockets of those clubs, which is a revenue source, but also helps our membership, navigate opportunity in that stay model. We are never going to be a sport that can implement stay to play. If you don't know what stay to play is, it's basically if you're coming to my meet, you have to stay at this hotel or these two hotels. Well, that's not going to work for this sport at any level, which is why USA Diving has kind of gone away from our third party hotel partner, who was taking care of a lot of this for us and trying to help set up these room blocks. But ultimately, their options were narrow, and our membership is doing what our membership wants to do. Maybe they have a relationship with a certain hotel chain, a Marriott, a Hilton, et cetera. I don't know if those are even the same or not, but maybe it's a parent of a club that always books all the hotels, and that parent always wants points to Holiday Inn, right? So there's not really an existing model that allows us to initiate a full stay to play like that, where we require you to stay, which unfortunately takes us out of the game for any potential larger hotel sponsorships at any level, at the senior national level or at the junior level. But hopefully, a little bit of awareness to that, and what we do as staff is to try to educate these hosts to make those phone calls, to initiate those conversations, um, to try to create revenue opportunities, but also then easy hand-fed resources to our coaches. And I might get some heat for this. I'm a diving coach myself. Diving coaches like things given to them on a silver platter, right? We like things when it's just handed to us when we don't have to do any work. And if anybody disagrees with that, I'll happily hear the challenge. But when we can hand a club owner or a head coach of a club or a parent volunteer who takes care of things and says, "Hey, here's a list of all the hotels, here's their rates, their distance from the pool, go book," chances are they're probably going to use that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I know the more you can make it easy for people, the more they're like, okay, sure, I'll do that one, that one, that one.
Mhm.
But that is also definitely something that's really important is doing room blocks and stuff. If we go back to what you're talking about with the schedule, I mean, I know you were talking about how much thought goes into which, regional zones, nationals, and I know some areas like school doesn't get out until June. And so essentially you're saying you're going to have a regional championship while the school season's still going like on. So it's not even summertime. And then if the kids don't move past that, they're not actually training or competing over the summer, which can cause a lot of problems too, because you don't have that. But then the kids are also in school and they're in finals and they're doing the last important things. Have you all thought about pushing everything back 2 weeks instead? So I know school starts again in August, depending on where you live, but some states it also starts in September too. Like it'll start after
Mhm.
Labor Day. So instead of trying to get nationals at the end of July, have you thought about pushing everything 2 weeks the opposite direction?
Yeah, there's definitely been discussions on the exact placement of those dates and what fits best. And I think it's really just a matter of what kind of like we really talked about the theme of this is what's the lesser of the evils, right? If we do move, and it's not like there is a wall or a reason why we can't explore those options. It's really looking at, well, all right, what barriers do we have to overcome? If we push that our entire junior schedule 2 weeks later, the first thought I had is for the portion of our coaches who live in the NCAA world. The mid-August time, the first 2 to 3 weeks of August for so many clubs and coaches is traditionally been off time, right? It's when vacations for our sport happens. It's when people are really taking a break and taking a deep breath. We have a significant number of club owners and club head coaches who are also NCAA coaches, and their athletes will be moving in the second to third or maybe even fourth week of August, and they start their college seasons up. And so, how is that going to look if we were to push 2 weeks back for them? Now, they're not the only people we should be thinking about, right? What about our coaches who are school teachers, or like you said, people who have to be missing school in these early or mid to late April and May meets. So we push regionals forward in the year by 2 weeks. Um, my concern initially, just shooting from the hip, would be, are we then, because our regional meets typically see the biggest population of unique athletes, how many proms and early graduations, and or AP testing, those types of things are we running into in that early to mid-May? What does the Memorial Day break look like from a training perspective with athletes and people traveling? And is there going to be significant missed time? What does our senior schedule look like congruently to that and our coaches who have obligations to senior athletes and junior athletes? And I'm really just shooting from the hip here. That's an interesting perspective to look at. What does that look like? One thing I will kind of say with that idea is after the 2026 year, the USA Diving Board of Directors has asked specifically for the national office to do a very intensive review of this junior format to see what it would look like for the 2027 year. And so what I would love to do is be able to ask that exact question going into 2027 about what does that look like and how would our coaches and our membership respond if we did push it 2 weeks, because it's a very valid opportunity.
No, and I mean, like I said, it is hard. I just know that it used to be regionals were in June, zones were in July, and nationals were in August. And then that way, the majority of people were not in school. So at least like you have some summer practice before regionals, and then you have zones and the nationals. And then hopefully, depending on where you live, you still might get a week or two off for vacation. I know my family personally, nationals was vacation for us, so it's not the
Yeah.
same for everyone, but it used to be June, July, and August. And so now if you're looking at April and May, it just makes it a lot harder. But then it also, I think, makes it harder for those clubs to try and get that revenue over the summer if those kids are not actually training in the summer because they haven't qualified on or passed it. But there obviously is a
That's
lot of
great.
logistics to go into that.
No, I really like that. And part of what's unfortunate when you said how it used to be, I unfortunately didn't have the opportunity to really grow up in the full swing of the USA diving season. I graduated high school in 2009. That tells you, my age at least. And so back then, I don't know, what was USA Regionals in 2008, 9, and 10, right about the time I would have been diving at that level. What did it look like 20 years ago? What does it look like, 15 years ago and now? And what are those differences? And I certainly know at the senior level, we used to have things like senior zones, and we used to have, a Grand Prix scheduled throughout the year. And as we've seen, World Athena switch to World Aquatics and how they do their schedule differently. One thing I have begun doing is looking at other countries. And at first, it gets really exciting to think about, well, what does Great Britain do? What does Australia do? What do some of these countries that have really successful programs do? And then you start looking at, well, they're government funded. Their resources financially are coming from the government. Oh, well, Great Britain, this number isn't for sure, but they might have 500 total members of their federation, because anybody who doesn't meet certain criteria, or anybody who, you know, is in a certain level, maybe isn't a member of their federation. And so, how do these models, what can we learn from them? And is it going to be applicable to our really unique and complex model? Yeah, we could probably go down the rabbit hole with that.
I do think, I mean, now it is a little different too because you've got AAUs become so popular and so, I don't want to say powerful, but like they've become a lot more popular with people where a long time ago it wasn't quite as popular. You did mention like those meets that they have, like the qualifiers and stuff. When you all do the schedule, do you actively work with AAU to try and make sure you all are not scheduling at the same time on top of each other?
Yeah, absolutely. Where I said I had come from I worked for the AAU, or alongside the AAU for, I want to say, a little over 2 years before officially moving into my role with USA Diving. And so, um, the executives, Joe Cherico and Louis Fellinger, are people that I got to know very, very well, getting to work alongside them. But it's not just USA Diving going to AAU to say how we can work together. It's AAU coming to USA Diving and saying, hey, how do we make sure that these meets are, split and done appropriately? Because both of us recognize the opportunities that we bring to athletes, right? We know the AAU offers the opportunity for athletes and coaches to compete with less barriers financially. That's a known, right? AAU can use the power of the 700,000 plus members that they have across all their sports to really provide a cheaper level of insurance. They unfortunately don't have the opportunity to certify or to give athletes to the Olympics because they don't have the USOPC charter. So they don't have that responsibility to, I don't want to say that higher level that USA Diving does, but they serve such an awesome purpose for entry level athletes at the beginning to break into the sport, but then also, probably more importantly, the mass volume of athletes who might not have had the opportunity to see a national championship level meet, they get that opportunity. And what's better than that? You have an athlete who, I mean, let's be honest, even with 584 athletes at a junior nationals, that's only a percentage of the divers in the country. And I'm not saying USA divers, that's a percentage of the number of diving athletes we have at every country club, YMCA, high school only divers, right? So the AAU providing this awesome opportunity for athletes who might not get that level of experience, help them bring and build their resume for college scholarships if that's the route they take, or bring recognition to themselves and their family and their community. So does USA Diving value the AAU and what they do? 100%. Do I personally? 100%. I mean, I've worked for both organizations, and there's no question that they both serve an awesome purpose. And I'm sure 30 years ago or 20 years ago, the politics between the organizations probably maybe wasn't great. I've heard, but you know what? Now I don't know that you could convince me that we don't have two groups of people who are not willing to sit down and talk. I mean, that's a pretty open dialogue and conversation to make sure that we are taking care of the sport, because it's not about the letters that are on anybody's shirt or bags. It's about the sport. And I think I have experienced nothing but collaboration in every conversation I've had with Joe and Lewis and anybody.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, I think they both have very valuable things to give to the athletes, to the coaches, to the membership. It would be unfortunate if they do ever have a time where they're scheduled at the same time, though, because then you're like, okay, well, which meet do you go to? So it's
Mhm.
good that you all like at least, take that into consideration. I do have one more question as far as like the scheduling you were saying. You said the board wants you to all do a deep dive after 2026 before 2027, which I think that's amazing that they want to do that. But I wonder how quickly you're going to be able to turn around those findings to be able to make sure you're set for the 2027 season. If you're trying to get the schedule out, ideally a year in advance and get people to know where you're going so they can plan accordingly, how quickly, like realistically, do you think after the season's over in 26? Will you be able to kind of decide that and then be able to make those changes? Or do you think after 26, you'll come up with a plan, but still keep 27 the exact same way that it was planned and not switch anything until 28, if that makes sense?
That is 100% a great question. And I think it's going to come down to not just the voice of our membership, but the logistics and operations behind it, right? Sites that have to be selected, contracts that have to be done a year or 18 months out, especially at the national level, making sure that our membership, their concerns are heard and we make adjustments appropriately. Um, the opportunity to make significant changes to the dates and the timing of the meets, like you had brought up and suggested earlier, that's probably a 2-year conversation, right? We've got to look at that from a little bit of a broader viewpoint. But the opportunity to maybe make adjustments in whether it's number of qualifiers, whether it's the format of the meet itself, the schedule within the confines of the meet. Those are things I think that we'll definitely have a chance to evaluate very quickly at every stage, from surveys and feedback collected after every part of it, regional zones, East, West, Central, and nationals. But there also has to be a collective understanding from our membership. If people are prioritizing us having a schedule a year or 18 months out, well, then they have to be in alignment with the fact that we might not be able to incorporate those points of feedback in a 1 year turnaround. If the priority of the national office, of the board, of the membership is that we really take that deep evaluation time before releasing the schedule, and that's what everybody's in full alignment with, well, then everybody has to be understanding of the potential impacts of waiting on that schedule, right? So I didn't want to leave that open-ended and say, well, I don't know. I want to make sure it's known that both of those have an incredible amount of value to them. But now it's going to be which one is really going to be best for our athletes and our coaches, waiting or implementing massive change right away.
No, I mean, I think it's going to be hard to try and figure out. Obviously, you don't want to change something after the first year of it happening. You want to give it a chance to test it out. But if you are going to evaluate it, you also have to be mindful of how long that evaluation process really does last. Because if it takes, say, 6 months, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, now we're going to change this. That's going to be really challenging to do that. So I just think being mindful that it might take a while is important, not just for you
Mhm.
all, but for the all the coaches that are going to be wanting change or happy with however it worked or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not talking about, making radical changes like all of a sudden there's no more regionals or there's no more East West Central, or, we're not talking about those changes. Those are pretty locked in and set. It's the changes within the confines of the formatting, like the potential date ranges or, the movements amongst the meets. Those are the changes that are probably more applicable, just so nobody gets worried that we're going to just eradicate and say, no more regionals anymore. Well, that's not happening, right? Not at least to my knowledge. And I think somebody would have told me that by now.
Yeah, that would be a big change to have right after another big change. It's like, all right, we're changing everything.
Yeah. No, I think the system will be evaluated probably towards the end of the quad overall. And then, our CCE and the elected people in those positions have the opportunity to really, if necessary, make a substantial change.
Well, I know you like really explained the schedule or the thought behind the schedule and everything. If we go back to just this past nationals, how do you feel like communication was? Do you feel like you guys did a good job communicating, or how do you feel like you could do better moving forward with that?
Yeah, great question. I think the answer to did we do a good job communicating, I would have to ask any of the coaches present on this call or have somebody text me and let me know because anybody who has ever worked with me before, by the way, we are an hour and 14 minutes into this Zoom, and if you can't tell, I over communicate. It's probably my biggest weakness and I would like to think a great strength. If you're an athlete of mine, especially at the collegiate level, they start rolling their eyes after about 45 seconds because they know they've got another hour left of me giving them every ounce of information under the sun. So, that being said, I am trying to actively work on not over communicating, but I believe in transparency. I believe that information and helping everybody understand what's going on is important. That being said, um, I definitely did not communicate to what I'm going to call my standard, which includes 1 to 2 emails per day at the end of every day with continual updates, because last year in 2024, I sent in a nightly email every single night and with reminders with things that were changing and doing. And we are coaches. We are busy. And when a coach looks at me and says, "Well, I didn't read the email. I don't check my email, or I'm not on my computer. My email doesn't go to my phone." Well, now is that the most effective way to communicate, right? And then even there were two coaches, and I won't say them by name, but they're going to know who they are, that joined the group me on the last day, and they got there the same day I did. And every single day they came up and said, "Hey, what I missed from the group me last night? What did you send out? Just tell me. I don't want to join it." And you know, it's it's hard to find those most effective methods that will reach out to everybody and kind of give that instant gratification without the overwhelming sense of communication. So yeah, I'd be curious to know what other people's thoughts were. Improvements. There's one without a doubt. And I'm gonna just call it out for what it is. We had a unfortunate opportunity where an international athlete was present and the coach, the athlete, the parent didn't hear the calls for them on the pool deck to come to the stand. And um, what we're talking about is this really complex, finite thing with can we um, can we disseminate or distribute the citizenship status of a minor? Nobody can answer that question, not in legal, not in anywhere. And so we're operating until we get the final answer on this really gray area between how much information we can give and how much we can't. So knowing we can't just slap a list on the wall and say, these are the international athletes, makes it really challenging, right? Makes it really challenging to not have a mistake like that. And I've lost plenty of sleep over those types of instances because ultimately we're there to give the best experience for everybody, athletes and coaches included. Um, so what can we do better? Well, we can certainly have a more structured internal system amongst our staff over having sign-offs, so to speak, of accepting positions and accepting movements. And if we don't have a physical sign-off, then we know that we have not, as a national office, completed the necessary steps to make sure that there was proper notification. I don't want to get into too many details in that specific situation because I don't want to give identities away in any capacity. But when we look at the variables surrounding that, every potential checks and balance as far as was there a coach on the pool deck? Was there representation communicated to who was observing that athlete? Was that athlete still in the pool by the time the results had certified? I mean, everything that we could have thought would have been covered unfortunately failed, and it gave us an idea of where a hole was. Now, my goal is to try to fill every single one of those gaps before they happen because we don't want anything to come at a cost of an athlete. But that was certainly a learning experience where even when you think you have every possible area covered, there obviously is more we can do without a question. So um, that really gave me an opportunity to bring more structure, especially to the international athlete component, given that this is only year 2 of doing it in the system that we have now, where we're allowing, and I say allowing, meaning we're both allowing and celebrating slash encouraging these athletes who pretty much holistically, I don't know of any that don't fit this bill, live, go to school, eat, sleep, and breathe on US soil 24/7. They train with these clubs and organizations, and because of whatever is going on in their personal lives or our government, don't have the opportunity to represent the US with a US flag. Now, should those athletes be able to compete or not compete? That's a discussion that I'd invite anybody to submit their feedback to the CCE and then continuing that conversation. But given that we now have the responsibility to try to give them the same opportunities, we're definitely still learning on the best way to do that without affecting anybody else negatively anyway.
For those international athletes, I mean, that is interesting because they are minors, so it's like trying to figure out the right way. Is there a way to put like an asterisk next to their name or like the letter I next to their name or something when they're competing so that people, you're not really telling their information, but you're sort of acknowledging that that person doesn't count towards the next thing?
So currently with the software within Dive Meets, and I will start by saying that Dive Meets um, is an has an incredible support system of well staff, right, that really run and work Dive Meets. And if you looked at my phone log and phone call history, I call the members of Dive Meets, the programmers and Sheila and Paul and Dario, probably more than I call anybody else in my life. I've spent more minutes talking with them, to the point where they're pretty much family. And I say that because programming things like you just suggested take a lot of time, and then also in that same breath potentially cause other domino effects. For instance, um, putting exhibition next to an international athlete does not allow you to advance them if they qualify to the next segment or had not before we had the opportunity to make some programming changes. So you would have to put them as exhibition to show in all of the reports, take them out as exhibition to advance them, put them back in exhibition, which doesn't allow them. And sorry, I'm getting a little too deep in the complexities. Can we do it? Yes, Chelsea. The answer is yes. It just takes time and it takes certified rules. Dive Meets doesn't act on a hey, maybe let's try this and do this, which is great. They shouldn't. They should program their software to fit our rule set. Right now, some of these practices amongst international athletes, where do we award them? Do we put them, do we give them a medal? Do we allow them to be announced if they finished in third, they would have finished in third place? Do we announce them alongside that third place finisher? How are their results displayed on the live results on websites in sense of if a US citizen was really first place, but an international athlete was first place? Well, let me tell you a scenario from 2024. There was an international athlete who was a top performer in their event, and their family was incredibly upset that the Dive Meets results then didn't show that they were first place, because then how does that affect their college recruiting? How does that affect, other aspects of their life? Well, the same argument can be made from the US citizen side of things. How does it look when a US citizen really got first and has the gold medal, but then on Dive Meets it says that they were second because they were beaten? And so I know that those are some hyper specific scenarios, but unfortunately, putting a simple international or I designation beside them to indicate to the general public or to the coaches or to the athletes that there is an athlete who may affect their finishing place, their qualification, advancement onto the next meet, has a little bit more complexities than I you would think, right? Something so simple ends up being much bigger.
Is that something that the rules committee should I don't know if it's the rules committee that would be doing this, but have a conversation like, okay, we really want to put together what this actually looks like for international athletes. I know this has nothing to do with like nationals necessarily with the past event, but would the rules committee say, okay, we want you guys to talk about this, figure out what this looks like for regional zones, the East, West, Central, nationals, prelims, semis, finals, all that. What does this actually look like? And then how do you determine what they kind of see? Like, getting the rules committee to sort of like decide one specific answer, then you don't have to worry about the not really sure what we're doing.
100%. One of the things that we are fortunate enough to have now, during COVID and the transition of that, the changes made to the rule book by the CCE. If anybody noticed at the beginning of the year, we were still operating under this old rule book with this amendment, with this version, because it took a lot of resources. And I was not a part of USA Diving when this had happened, and I'm sure there are numerous reasons, but the rules committee itself no longer exists. So the creation, changing, evaluation, the question of whose responsibility it is to write the rule book, to maintain the rule book, to update the rule book, fell when that rules committee was dissolved. And so now you found a hole, a gap, where the national office staff had to try to scramble and figure out, well, first and foremost, how do we take all the changes and give them into one concise place? And so one of our staff went well above and beyond, took a lot of her own personal time to get our rule book current, in the sense to get all of the amendments and changes and reformatted in a digestible way where people can find things. So we have a 2025 rule book. Now, we have a 2025 rule book that was approved by the CCE, that was certified by the board, is now available to the public on the website. And now we can take that 2025 rule book, write in all of the changes that are now existing within this new junior format, and go through and work through all of the changes that the international athlete component does affect and or will affect. So now that we have that, the staff and I have been working really closely on making sure that we add all of our input as far as those rule changes go. Because much like you, if a USA Diving staff member wants to change a rule, we follow the same process. We write up what we want the rule to be. We based on how the rule is written, we submit that to the CCE for evaluation and review, and then we write it in, and then it goes to the board of directors for approval. And so we are working through all of those on behalf of our membership, where I especially can see the holes like we've talked about, to try to make sure that there is a process and a procedure in place. One thing that Leslie Hasselbeck has taught me in this role is every decision you make has to have a wall for you to stand behind, because every decision that is made that might affect an athlete, a coach, or the outcome of a meet has to have a policy, a practice, something in place. And that is something that has really driven me to make sure that we have that process in place, not just for this entire international comportment, but every single aspect and element of what we do. So we have that really consistent and continual elevation of not just our events, but of the sport.
No, I appreciate that. I didn't realize there wasn't a rules committee anymore, so that's my fault for not realizing that that went
Oh,
away.
I bet you could ask anybody on this call, and some might say, "Hey, what is the rules committee? What was it? When did it go away?" Right? This is not something that's probably widely known, especially someone like you who is so involved in our sport in so many different capacities and has been for years. So, how do we, as USA Diving, get better information out about the committees? If I called on Josh, I can pick on him because I know him well. Josh, what does the CCE stand for, and what do they do?
Uh, Good something coaches excellence. Couldn't tell you.
Right.
I work in NCAA, don't really deal with it. But
And
I know they help obviously orchestrate all the junior diving and high performance team stuff. So that's all I got. Appreciate
no,
you,
that's
but
great. And
thank you.
You're
I
fired
picked
from
on
our
him.
board, Josh.
Josh, thanks for letting me pick on you. But those are opportunities where, okay, on one hand, you know what? Everything you need to know about the CCE is on the USA Diving website. I could send you the link right now where to find it. And if you wanted to read for 20 minutes through the charter, through, the history, well, I'll tell you what, it's on the website. Well, that is accessible to every single one of our coaches, but how many of them have gone to the website to read through it to better understand what the process is, what they exist? Well, come on, we're diving coaches. We're not going to do that. And I'm not trying to talk bad about diving coaches, but now it opens up this whole Pandora's box of, well, how do we make sure that this information is communicated out? So that way, if a coach has an issue with a rule or a question about how to make a change, or where do they find something, well, getting them to know where the resource exists or who they can talk to is something we're trying to do more of, to do better of, to make sure that people know exactly where to find what they need.
Well, and that's why we've really tried to take in the initiative of doing these town halls to sort of have these conversations because Yeah, it's like if I have to read something, I might not do it. If you have an audiobook, sure, I will listen to that all day. Or if I can like listen to a podcast or something, I'm probably a lot more likely to understand it. But it also depends too on how people understand things. If you read all the legislation of CCE, someone's gonna be like, that still makes no sense. Where if you can kind of like dumb it down and have it make a little bit more sense for everyone listening, that's why the PDCAs really try to do these town halls, and we appreciate you partnering with us for this. It's why we're doing the symposium in spring or in September, which is actually all now going to be virtual as well. So it'll be, not to do a nice little plug, but September 13th and 14th, it'll all be
Mhm.
virtual too, because we want to give people these resources, and it's not just, okay, go to this website. Instead, it's like, let's actually, have these conversations. Let's talk about things. Let's learn a little bit more because, yeah, I've been involved in the sport forever and I didn't know we didn't have the rules committee anymore, which I guess is on me for not knowing that. But things change. And so getting that information out there to people and doing it in a way where they actually understand what you're talking about, I think is huge.
Yeah, and Chelsea, I'm going to plug in right with you. Again, not recognizing or understanding that the letters, whether USA, AAU, PDCA, NFHS, NCAA, et cetera, we really got to take that step back and remember that our sport will only be as successful as we are collaborative. And so if you have to look at what sacrifices have to be made to attend a PDCA symposium where you guys are putting together this great list of presenters and resources to help people. And if it's going to take that sacrifice of a coach's time, well, then we've got to ask ourselves as coaches, what's really important to us? Because if we're going to talk about all the issues and the things that aren't going well, what are we doing as individuals then to fix it? Are we going to these awesome opportunities like you are offering in a couple weekends to hear, to learn, to offer input? Are we attending the USA town halls that we're trying to build in? Are we utilizing those resources like the website, and are we just talking about rules we don't like on the pool deck and then going home and saying, I didn't have time for that, right? We all find time to do the things that are really important to us. So to piggyback on that plug, go to the symposium if you're listening to this. Because you're going to learn something, and you cannot tell me that you wouldn't. It doesn't matter who you are and what you do. So go to the symposium, go to the next town hall for USA Diving or AAU, or if the NCAA hosts a town hall, right? Go to it. Take that extra time, or make sure somebody close to you does, so you can get that information. Because we gotta figure out how we start collaborating more.
Oh, I agree. And another reason we do this is because we always can keep learning. I mean, I say that all the time.
Mhm.
Like, none of us are perfect. I mean, I have a PhD and I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room. There's a lot that I can still learn. And I think that that's why it's good to just keep pushing yourself because it's not just about, oh, how to teach flips and twists. It's about how to be better people, better mentors, leaders, business people, all the different assets that go into being a coach so that we can be more successful and actually make this sport really successful too, but then also make it a real business where you're making money from it. You're helping athletes be better humans in the long run and stuff. And so, anyone who says I don't need any help, I think they got to take an internal look and realize that none of us are perfect and we can all keep growing and getting better for sure. So,
I'll
appreciate it.
go on record and second that.
Okay, so I know we've been taking up so much of your time. I have, I guess, two more questions if that's okay.
Yep.
So the first one is just as far as like the meet sites and picking where the host meets are for these competitions. I know in the past there used to be, you would nominate yourself and then it would get voted on at the regional zones, national championships. Now there's a different way to do it. Can you explain sort of how the decisions get made to pick where these competitions are? And then if people want to be one of those teams that's considered, what's the process for that look like?
Yeah, I'll do my best to go through it quick. For regionals, it's written in our rule book that the coaches that exist geographically within a region, within that specific region, have to vote, nominate, and vote at their coaches meeting. I was able, with approval from the board and the CCE, to put a pause on that this year because the decision on whether or not this new format was going to be implemented by the board of directors was happening on the Sunday that fell in between the regional weekends. And it was not going to make a lot of good or sense to select regional sites when and if the dates were changing, the format was changing, et cetera, cause a lot of confusion. And so that's where I talked about sites that were selected in 2024, still carrying to 26 that were under contract. That's why. So if you're a regional site, unless a rule proposal is submitted and changed, which I don't foresee, with the exception of a hopeful minor change in that because region choice exists, meaning clubs can go to any regional meet across the country, that means that there could be sites that aren't having the opportunity to host simply because they're not at a coaches meeting. So the options there are hosting virtual coaches meetings that are region specific. And even if you're not going to a coaches meeting, it's an all region meeting where anybody and everybody has the chance to go in. But then again, you're going to have people that can't attend. So I'm hoping to move towards with the technology we have available to us, an electronic and online nomination system where then regions, which there are many across the country that have very specific rotations where they are all in this historical agreement that it goes this state, this state, this state, this state, and it just keeps rotating. And they practice that almost by law. And that's great. There's no wish to circumvent that, just to formalize and to make sure that equal opportunity presents. So this year for regions, Riley within our USA staff has already sent out confirmation notices to all of the sites that we have under, so to speak, agreement from the 2024 year. Any remaining sites that are not decided on based on the 2024 regional coaches meetings are going to go out for nomination and then a vote. Every program will have one vote within regions. We are going to be tracking that electronically. We are going to make sure that, no clubs get multiple votes, that it's all, as clean as it can be. Then once all of our sites are under signed agreement, then we'll release the dates and the locations. It does nobody any good to say, oh yeah, it's probably going to be this site at this date. It causes mass confusion. So as much as we all have to be patient, and I don't like that because I'm not as patient as I'd like to be either, we have to wait till those sites are under agreement. Then for zones, East, West, Central, and Nationals. Zones in East, West, Central. Those are events sites that are under a bid. So there is a bid application process on the USA Diving website where if you would like to be a zone host, you will go to that website, you will apply via that application, and then the same for East, West, Central. Those are not up yet because as we have reformatted the meets, the bids themselves are going through the legal reviews right now of having been reformatted. The splits are being reevaluated for what the revenue share agreements are between hosts and USA Diving and how to make sure that these meets are profitable, figuring out how we design the schedule to make sure synchro events and future champion events and what I'm going to say the non-qualifying events can be better revenue generating opportunities for hosts. So there are a lot of those considerations being made. So any zone that doesn't have an assignment for next year will be communicated out once those bids, hopefully in the next 2 weeks, are available, if not before. And then East, West, Central, the decisions I talked about earlier with how many judges, how many medical, how that affects the fiscal responsibility of any potential site hosts are being reviewed right now, discussed with the Judges Commission, discussed looking at our grant availability for medical staff support. All of those things are being done right now to be able to have that bid as accurate as necessary to go out. Nationals, as most people probably already know, are currently under contract for the even years in 2026 and 2028 for Morgantown, West Virginia, and 2027 for Mission Viejo. However, we do need to give respect that those contractual agreements were made with the presumption of that previous format. Both of those sites do have the opportunity to continue discussions with our office about whether or not it's still going to fit for them to host with this new model. Both of these sites, Mission Viejo and Morgantown, West Virginia, are incredibly great partnerships with USA Diving. I mean, truly, they are the communities, the facilities. So I don't foresee any changes to those, but we also need to give respect to them to evaluate their own resources and availability, and that's being done right now too.
Perfect. Thank you. I was wondering with the nationals being a little bit smaller now, would that give more opportunity for other programs to host national championships? I mean, obviously it's nice going to the same location because you get comfortable with it. The downside is you're not really spreading it out on who gets to host those competitions.
Yeah, and that's a great point because it certainly can get a little stale. The consideration, though, just has to be recognized about the financial commitment that it takes to host that. USA Diving cannot host a national championship without the support of the CVB or the Tourism Bureau. our entry fees and our membership fees do not pay the bill for a meet. When you're looking at a 10-day junior national meet, or even a 7 or 8 day with practice days, you're talking about anywhere from $60,000+ in pool rental fees. We'll do the math. If you even have the old format now of 600 athletes and all of the event entries, that doesn't even come close to that pool rental fee. And we haven't even talked about all the other associated costs, right? So unless we want to, as an organization, move to a $2,000 entry fee per athlete, well, I'm sorry, we don't have the freedom to just go anywhere and anytime. We have to work with these facilities and these communities that are willing to make these really big financial obligations or financial commitments to USA Diving, understanding the reality of our sport. We're not pulling in thousands of people to an event. Doesn't matter what event it is. Even our Olympic trials event didn't have 10,000 people going to it, right? We're not filling a stadium with the number of people we go to. So what's the draw? Why would a community want to host us? Well, they have to see the value in USA Diving, its mission, its ability, and the fact that it's going to be producing the next level of Olympians. And the people in those positions of decision making or influence often are motivated by numbers. It comes down to that. So it doesn't mean that there are not other facilities that will be in consideration, but know that these facilities have to have the full backing and support of a CVB, of a tourism bureau that's going to be able to help the financial side of what it takes to host a meet of that caliber.
No, it definitely makes sense. I mean, I know hosting a couple day competition is really expensive for pool rent and everything. Can't imagine, 10 days long of a competition. I just wasn't sure if it would change. So it's good though for people if they are interested to sort of see where the extra revenue can come in, whether they get people to volunteer their time with like massage tables or athletic trainers, get their organizations like in their city to sort of help with that. So I guess people should do the legwork in advance before they kind of contact you to see like where the money could come from in a different aspect too, probably.
Yeah. And we're always happy to explore options with people. There's, contrary to maybe the belief system that exists, there's not some like back door behind the scenes negotiations going on with any facility across the country anywhere. Trust me, I can tell you for a fact, this is nothing to do with who's giving Mike Retcher or any one of our staff money to bring an event there. It's come on. It is 100% about who has the infrastructure, the financial resources to pay those associated costs, because the alternative would be making this sport well, you wouldn't be able to participate as a normal human athlete, because you're going to be paying out the wazoo and fees just to support it, right?
Steve Olmecki, excuse me, Steve Olmecki said, what about making the meet smaller, like a true elite meet with less days, less cost, etc.?
Great question. Largely, I think we as a national office rely on our board of directors, our CCE, to take those points of feedback and help direct us, along with the high performance department, into what best puts us in a position to help secure medals down the road. And so I don't know that I feel comfortable necessarily saying, yes, we should go to a 12-person national championship, finals only format, et cetera, because I don't know if I could justify on either side of the table, is that the best move? So to that point, I say, well, what we'd have to design and develop the qualification criteria, procedures to giving access to that. And just to play devil's advocate on the other side, there are certainly a lot of people who have, I won't say issue or maybe issue with the cost associated with USA Diving. What do I get out of being a USA Diving member when I have to pay the initial membership fee, and I'm only getting a guaranteed regional competition? Well, there's another perspective on it. If we're limiting the competition opportunities without creating additional opportunities for athletes to compete in, that further drives that conversation of what is the value of a USA Diving membership at the price point it is. So, Steve, that's not a bad idea at all. We just would have to make sure that every deciding group, or every group within the organization has the opportunity to really evaluate whether or not that's going to be it's necessary to put a medal on around someone's neck in LA and beyond.
No, I appreciate that. So I know we've taken up so much of your time. It's been an hour and 45 minutes, which we really appreciate. Um,
Mhm.
are you okay if anyone has a question that they can ask you? I don't want to monopolize your time any more than we already have.
Anybody who's still listening to this, whether they're listening to a recording or still on here, either really likes hearing me talk or might have a question that I can answer. So I am more than excited to give as much of my time as necessary tonight, but also to make sure that everybody knows my email address is just michael.retcher@usadiving.org. So if you have follow-up questions, my cell phone number is just about everywhere you can imagine. But if we don't, I talked about the sacrifices earlier. If we don't make the sacrifices now, well, how are we going to move forward? So my time is all yours. Ask away.
Well, I appreciate it. I just, looked at the clock and I was like, man, we have been taking up a lot of your time tonight, which we appreciate.
Bother. Mhm.
Does anyone who's on this call, live have any questions for Mike that he can answer for you? I do know you asked, or you answered a lot of questions. You gave us a lot of detail, a lot of information. I appreciate how transparent you are with all of it, how honest you are with all of it. I mean, we've talked about before, I think it's always good to come from a place of learning and growth. And nothing's ever perfect. And so the fact that you guys have thought so deeply about all the different areas and aspects to me just shows how important this is to you, and that it wasn't, oh, we just had a national championship. Like there's a lot of thought that goes into it. And I think it's really nice for everyone to sort of see that, because if anyone's ever run a meet, it never goes the way it's supposed to go. It never goes perfect. And it sometimes runs really smoothly, sometimes it doesn't. But if there's plans in place ahead of time, it makes it a little bit easier. But there's also, like you said before, there's some plans you cannot prepare for. Like you don't know if something's going to happen. You just have to deal with it in that moment. And so I think it's been nice having you take on this role. I know a lot of people have said a lot of amazing things about you being in the role that you're in right now, and having this open conversation with us, I think just shows even more that you're doing the right thing and going in the right direction. So we appreciate your time, and everything that you've done tonight and just in general, for us.
Appreciate that a lot, Chelsea, and thanks for the opportunity. And I'll both apologize and say thank you for everybody who stuck through it for this call. I hope you learned at least one thing about what we're doing, but also, we're going to walk away with the confidence that it is our goal to collaborate with anyone and everyone possible, and also our goal to continue growing our sport and making sure that we do what's best possible for our athletes, coaches, and families. So thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. And I guess I'll say one final plug. We are hosting the virtual symposium on September 13th and 14th. You can apply online to do it, but we are going to have guest speakers from Laura Wilkinson's going to be there. We're going to have sports psychologists. We'll have nutritionists, strength trainer, athletic trainer, people talking about business, legal issues, like all aspects, because diving is not just how to make your body flip and twist in the air. It's all these other things too. So hopefully you guys can come on that as well. Mike, hopefully you come too and join us.
I'll be there.
Perfect. Well, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sticking with us for this. If you're watching it on replay, maybe fast forwarded so we spoke a little bit faster, but
Mhm.
thank you.
Good call.
Yes. But I hope you guys have a great night, and thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.